So I know that when people experience this stuff and it is in communities, it has an impact. It has an impact in how we think about ourselves, about what we can aspire to, but also it leaves that pain.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the research, and going back to Dr. Carter and Peters, one of the things they identify is that a sense of injustice and powerlessness in the face of injustice is one of the key triggers in terms of causing trauma reactions. And living as people, as Black people in a society, that sense of injustice is continually there, and that powerlessness, because we just kind of know the regime is so so difficult to break through
Yeah.
that we can't change it, or we feel sometimes we can't change it. So yeah, it's definitely a real thing.
Yeah.
And I see it showing up, particularly in mental health for the people I work with.
Toxic interaction theory.
Mm.
I had never heard this before you strung those three words together. So what is toxic interaction theory? Explain it to the layperson that
Sure.
might be listening.
Okay, so preceding me developing this concept of toxic interaction theory, there was a lot being spoken about and written about around institutional racism in mental health and in other public services.
Yep.
And one of the consequences of that is that individual workers felt that when they saw poor outcomes, that the language of institutional racism was suggesting that they, as individual practitioners, were racist.
Yeah.
And it was de-skilling. But also, on the other side, it invisibilized the experience of racialized people in that. It's almost as though our workers are just doing this thing
Yeah.
to passive human beings. So the concept of toxic interaction theory could be summarized as follows. Where you have a white worker or someone of color working in a white institution in a relationship, a supposed therapeutic relationship with someone of color,
Yep.
there is often a desire to avoid talking about the impact of race, or to very much narrow the frame of what they think racism is. Meaning that unless the person says someone posted poo through my letterbox or sprayed the N-word on my car, we don't really see racism.
Yeah.
So often there is a silence about it. And because often in the services they're attending to a crisis, the focus on the crisis means that attention to the impact of racism, not the impact of race, the impact of racism becomes invisibilized. And that isn't neutral. And that's the point I'm really trying to get across, is that workers will think that as long as they're good at contacting housing, prescribing the medication, following up on the medication, and they're doing well on those things, that if they never get into the conversation about racism, that it's kind of okay. And my analysis, based on the research I've looked at, is that it invalidates someone's lived experience in the same way that if I were working with someone who was street homeless, who was out there in the cold winters, not finding food, and I just kind of had a therapeutic relationship with them and paid attention to their presenting problem, and never once spoke about the fact that they're experiencing that adverse social thing in their life, it would be toxic.
Yeah.
Because it would be almost like assuming that it isn't really relevant to what we're talking about. And racism is often overlooked in that way. And it has what we could describe as that iatrogenic effect, the kind of unintended negative consequences of our interactions with people. So that is what toxic interaction theory is about.
Okay. And are you saying that, so toxic interaction speaks to the ongoing relationship and that being toxic between, I guess, for example, a white practitioner and then a black patient or case?
Yeah, it's the nature of it being ongoing, but the fact that I am also bringing into the room something. So in research, as you probably know, there's this kind of idea of sometimes having an interaction with something else kind of further upstream. And I guess that was partly the point, is that when you've got the practitioner and the client or service user in the room, it isn't just what's happening in the room.
Yeah.
You're going to be interacting with their prior experiences. Again, I'd summarize it like this. If you've got a day, if you're a white worker, where you've just got a letter from the bank that you're over your overdraft and your relationship is rocky and you're feeling pretty bad today, and you're really distracted, that level of distraction will be experienced differently if you're a white person who thinks what's up with the worker, they're being distracted, or if you're, say, a young black man who's accustomed to going into the housing office and finding that people are pretty dismissive and take long to attend to him, or going to the department store and experience the same thing, then when they come into that environment, it looks like
Like
that
that.
thing. It
Yeah.
looks like that thing. And it might be a false positive, but it still will be experienced as such. So it places a burden or a responsibility on the practitioner to say, actually, how might this person be experiencing
Yeah.
how I'm being? And that's a concept of theory of mind that psychologists will talk about, being able to look into the world of someone else and say, how
Somebody
might
else's
you be
perspective.
experiencing it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you're actually saying that because of, I guess, I'm going to use the word our experiences of the world, that actually when we do have certain encounters with people that may actually be attributed to something else going on in their life, we would attribute that to actual racism. Like, we think that's
Potentially.
right. And then that affects the dynamic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, going back to what I said about individualizing it, the problem is that the practitioner who might feel they've got good values and they want to get things right are deeply offended because they feel that this is a slur against them.
Yeah.
Hence my earlier analysis where I'm saying, well, what's really important is to kind of understand what Cedric Robertson will kind of talk about, the racial regime, that we're all living in this system that has been created.
Yeah.
And, kind of very topical thing in tennis. It's kind of happened twice recently where Eastern European white tennis players have been in conversation that could be interpreted in a particular way in relation to black tennis players. And as I go on social media, literally on the train coming here, I could see a black person saying, what has this got to do with race? And the thing is we don't get a choice
Yeah.
about whether it's to do with race. Because on the national stage, where you play out those kind of dialogues and interactions, you can't choose to then say it wasn't about race. In the same way that if there was a young black man who went into a predominantly white middle class area and assaulted someone, it would become about race, whether or not he called anybody any racial slur
Yeah.
or not. It would still be, we don't have that choice
Yeah.
because the racial regime exists around us.
Yeah, okay. And I guess what you're saying is that interaction, that toxic interaction, means that it's one of probably many reasons why we are more likely to have poor outcomes. Like, I guess let's speak about mental health outcomes than our white counterparts, basically.
Yeah, indeed. And because that kind of interaction that I speak about in mental health services is replicated, and I don't write about it in education or in any other public service, but it's literally replicated in so many aspects of life, even in our friendship circles, where on a night out, it can, not everyone drinks, but on a night out, it starts off kind of okay. And then later on into the night, a little phrase drops, or you notice your friends singing along to a particular song you
Kendrick
wish they
Lamar
did.
song or something, yeah.
You wish they didn't, and you kind of have to live with that in a way. I say have to. Some people say you don't have to. But anyway, for most of us, we kind of have to live with that because we want to get from one end of the day to the next. So we're forever living in this world where our sense of self is being shaped by the way in which other people see us.
Yeah.
And, kind of going back to theorists, Du Bois kind of spoke about double consciousness and the way in which we end up kind of seeing ourselves, not just as we see ourselves, but we're so aware of how others are
people
seeing
see
us.
us, yeah.
And therefore it shapes our very experience. So yes, that will have an absolute consequence of outcomes, both, as I say, the kind of individual mental health problems, but also the experience of services.
Yeah. Okay, that is you're gonna take me on another journey now, because it's like I can't have you here and then not speak a bit more about race and our experience of racism. You're basically saying that I know that you perceive me as black. Like, anytime I'm having an interaction with somebody, I know you think I'm black. I know you know I'm black, and there's implications for you knowing I'm black, and then my own judgments come in. Okay, so is that a me problem? Is that a us problem? That should we be maybe have more grace and understand that okay, somebody perceives me as black, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all of the other stereotypes come alongside that, but it just means they perceive me as black? Or is this something that we need to change in society? Is it possible to change those kind of interactions in society? I'm basically asking, like, is there a way to counter toxic interaction theory? Is there a way to minimize it?
The only thing we can do is to make explicit. So one of the things we know about many forms of trauma is the more we suppress them, the more they find subversive ways of emerging and paying attention to things. And it's like in any relationship, you can kind of go for 3 days where everyone can tell that there's something going on,
Yeah.
and no one's
No one
prepared to
said
say,
anything,
yeah.
yeah.
And then someone has got to go, all right, can we just cut through the
Can we
ball?
talk about
Oh
it?
yeah,
Yeah.
someone needs to talk about this stuff. And literally, that is how we can kind of get through toxic interaction theory, to kind of go, look, actually, I'm aware that, like, we're looking at each other,
Yeah.
and maybe there are judgments. Maybe we're trying as hard as we can to not fall into stereotypes, but we know they exist. And kind of going back to your specific question about, well, is it possible that people might look at us and not be informed by those stereotypes? All of the studies of unconscious bias tell us that there are things that seep into our unconscious, whether we like them or not.
Or not, yeah.
And I particularly like some of the work of Bernardi and Greenwald, where they kind of describe that we are likely to have biases that we don't fully endorse in our conscious minds. In the same way, so this is really controversial, but Bashi in his recent album kind of speaks about this, that you end up fearing people who look like you. And many black people will know that they'll catch themselves off guard if they are walking down the street at night and they see a group of young black guys walking with a hoodie, and for a minute they'll feel, what people say colloquially, they'll feel shook.
Yeah.
And then have to wrestle with the fact that, actually, I wish I didn't have this kind of bias.
Yeah.
But it seeped into me.
Yeah.
So and that's for us who have a vested interest in working against it.
Yeah.
So for other people who don't have that daily wrestling with that, that stuff just sits there. And that's just kind of one stereotype. There's so many assumptions about what race has come to mean.
Yeah.
And it's almost impossible for anyone, as
To be
Ibrahim
immune from the stereotyping that comes along with all of that.
Yeah, Ibrahim X. Kendi in How to Be an Anti-Racist said, you can't walk through the rain and not get wet.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, you can't live in this society, you can't live in this system without subscribing to some of the stuff.
No.
Yeah. So awareness is one thing, and I love what you said about being aware of something, and even the analogy is very good. When you're aware of something, that's when you can start to tackle it.
Yeah.
Okay, what does the tackling look like? Like, want somebody, what if, like, a white person says, okay, I acknowledge I have these stereotypes, or I think in a certain way. I acknowledge the ones that I'm conscious of, and I acknowledge there are going to be things that are in my unconscious that I'm not aware of. What do I then do to start addressing it?
Great. So alongside toxic interaction theory is a model called TAMES, which I'm not going to kind of get this into a talk session. But in summary, what it's about is kind of just tuning into where the person's at and finding a way to begin to expand your understanding of what racism is. That literally is the gateway to so much. Because if I'm talking to you and I think that unless I say to you that I've experienced this kind of name calling or something in the day, that you're not going to think that I've experienced racism, then I'm just not going to talk to you about life. But we can kind of talk about why we've got the migratory patterns we've got, what's kind of happened historically. That means that some people are here, we are here because you were there. It's like understanding all of that. Racism shows up in so many ways. It shows up in the decisions that people make about, like, how they're going to get money quick. And you can kind of go, oh, but I also grew up on that estate and I didn't go down that route. But that is to ignore the fact that there are patterns to who kind of finds these ways. And, the way in which people spend money on bling, like, what is that about trying to kind of find value in external because you can't find it internally? Once you open up that conversation to say, actually, I understand that racialized trauma isn't just that red flag names calling stuff, but I understand how it just runs through everything, your experience of education, everything, then we can begin to make someone feel validated enough to talk about what their struggles might be. And even, like, for us to be in this conversation to talk about some of those things that I said, oh, it's controversial, but because I kind of feel I'm comfortable in this space. There's certain kind of places I wouldn't even mention. I know this
Yeah.
is a podcast going out there, but in certain places I wouldn't be venturing into that kind of conversation because there wouldn't be the psychological safety
Yeah.
for me to do that. So that's the gateway, is to expand. And Katie Greenland and colleagues kind of talk about how often people narrow the definitional boundaries of discrimination, and our role as workers is to begin to expand that in the way that I've said,
Yeah.
to understand how racism has an impact on people in all aspects of their lives.
Yeah. Okay, that's so powerful. Okay, all right. I'm gonna broaden this now before we get more specific again. Who do you think is responsible for, I'm going to say black people, yeah? Who do you think is responsible for black people's experience of the world today and improving that experience of the world today? And I guess I asked this question from two perspectives. There are some people that's going to say, actually, look, although we didn't have opportunities and we have less opportunities than our counterparts, we do have a lot of opportunity now to educate ourselves, to do great things. So there's some people that will think that actually the responsibility to improve our experience as a race is down to us. And then there's going to be other people that also rightly say that actually the responsibility sits with the people that are oppressing us and have been oppressing us and changing those systems. What do you think about that?
Okay, great. So the line of analysis is very much, as you've said, either it's the endogenous things within, or it's the exogenous, the kind of external factors. And where did it come from? Well, the idea of race is relatively new, but there has been a discrimination against people of color for a long time. And kind of going back to Cedric Robinson's work, he's really tried to kind of remove the idea that it started around the transatlantic slave trade. He's kind of, if you go back into history, you can kind of see, Baltic Islands and others have always kind of had some discriminatory attitude based on skin tone. What happened, though, and I kind of stand by this, in terms of, I guess, the transatlantic slave trade, and once we kind of got into 1492 and all of that era, is the attempt to make it as something scientific. And that really embedded the idea that there is some biological difference that you can actually find out, you can investigate it and prove this biological difference. That is the root of what we're dealing with, largely because it established a hierarchy, and it tried to establish the hierarchy as truth. Cedric Robinson, however, uses this language of it being a regime, and I kind of referred to kind of racial regime earlier. And for me, I quite like this idea. I'm relatively new to Cedric Robinson's work, and I really like the idea of it being a regime, in that it's something that is changeable. Because the hierarchy kind of sounds as though it's really fixed, and supposedly every racialized group knows where they're supposedly fit. Whereas it shifts over time, and because there's often resistance against it, it has to keep changing itself. So that's, for me, the answer is to really understand that there is a consequence to the hierarchy or the regime. That means that people adopt roles and positions that they come to believe are matched to who they are. And it takes a lot more effort to step outside of that. And, if you are someone who live in social housing where, I don't know, you just lost 2 tires on your car, and you just kind of think, actually, that's £400 I haven't got. You might kind of think, well, a friend who's always been asking you, do you want to kind of, do you know any of your friends who want to buy some weed? And you kind of think, okay, well, what's the harm? And just one weekend just selling 2 bags of weed and just getting that money. And then when you suddenly think, wow, it just took me a weekend to get that money, and people end up defaulting into things because the world is already shaped to create particular pathways for them that might be different to their contemporaries. And I guess that's why that simplistic idea of, but I wouldn't have made that choice, is to not understand what trauma looks like, or racialized trauma looks like. And I'll just underline this for anyone listening. Trauma, generally speaking, looks like bad decisions and bad behavior on occasions. People think that trauma is just an emotional outpouring. people make really, really rough decisions because they've been traumatized.
Yeah.
So they end up in relationships, or they end up using substances, or they end up doing stuff
Yeah.
that the rest of us might not.
Yeah. Okay. All right. How might, I guess, the toxic interaction theory relate to non-clinical spaces or outside of work, like everyday interactions? How does it play out there, and what are the implications of it there, if it is a thing there?
Yeah, so this is great because one of the experiences many people who look like me will have is that there's this big thing that's happened in the world, and you can be amongst your friends, and no one talks about it. And you kind of think, has this not, whether it's the murder of George Floyd, I know a lot of people did speak about that, but there are things on that scale sometimes that just seem to be
Brushed under
beneath the
the top. Yeah,
radar of
yeah,
others.
yeah.
And it feels pretty jarring because it's almost as though people don't have a sense of how grave this feels or how difficult this feels. And then, when people say things like, oh, these things were in the past, we need to move on, it means that we're often living in spaces where our experiences are being invalidated. And then what we end up doing is that we almost censor ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's a heavy burden.
Yeah.
So, we've got the kind of language French Fanon spoke about, black skin, white mask, or code switching, these kind of ways in which we can't be our authentic selves.
Yeah.
So it's almost like we're doing this additional job every single day of managing what we're feeling, but also trying to stay in relationships. And some of those relationships we really value. You could
Yeah.
have gone to school with people, known them for 17 years, and actually really enjoy going to football or dancing with them. And they matter to you as real human beings. And it's also hard
Yeah.
when they just don't get it.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think about code switching? What do you think about somebody like me code switching? What advice would you give to me about code switching? Would you say that actually I should do it and it's beneficial and it's going to help me navigate maybe the working world or life in general? Or would you say that actually I'm suppressing or I'm acting when I'm doing that, and that can be mentally taxing, and that actually it doesn't benefit us as a community to continue doing that, because then we just perpetuate what is the right and wrong way of speaking?
Sure. Code switching is inevitable. It's a protective mechanism. And here's something. There's a guy, Lennox Thomas, who used to run a therapy center in London, who I really valued his work. And one of the things he used to kind of talk about is the fact that supposedly street black, whoever they are, used to say to supposedly well-spoken middle-class black people that you're not black, like you're
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
trying to be something else. And Lennox used to say, but who are the people who are reading the books and passing on the knowledge about our history to their kids and really investing in that? It's actually, black academics or black thinkers.
Yeah.
Those very people are considered to be outside of truly black. So there's a degree of inevitability and perhaps desirability around code switching, because there are going to have to be occasions when we are in environments where we have to be something in order to gain acceptability. And I think it's just one of those things where we go, it's okay, as long as I'm not fooled into believing that people really believe what they see in me. Meaning, there are occasions, way back in the 80s, there was one of the very first black MPs called John Taylor, who was in Gloucestershire, in Cheltenham, in fact, I think. I don't think that's in Gloucestershire. Anyway, he was running in that area. And a guy called Galbraith was saying, we don't want an N-word person for our MP.
Yeah.
And he was a well-established lawyer, highly regarded in his field, a black man who was put forward by the Conservative Party to be an MP. And I'm sure in his day job, many doors opened for him.
Yeah.
But literally, like that,
He got that yeah.
he got the reminder.
Yeah.
And I think code switching is fine as long as we don't
forget-
delude ourselves.
Don't forget yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good answer. Okay, you mentioned something else when we were discussing what we were going to discuss. You said you said race as a technology. What do you mean by race as a technology? I was so fascinated. We nearly got into a whole conversation about it when we were speaking on Teams. But what is race as a technology? What does that mean?
Right, okay, again, going back to Cedric Robinson, it's really this idea that people have come to believe in race, some immutable aspect of who we are. As I said earlier on, that we could kind of, subject it to some biological analysis and determine which race people belong to, and that there's some degree of fixity, like reality to that. But actually, race serves us more as a way of achieving an end. That's what race actually is. It isn't. So, if I say, people of an African background, I always say, are you talking about people in the north who might be light-skinned Algerians or Moroccans, or are you talking about people in the south who might be your very, very dark-skinned Ugandans, for example? It's like, who's deciding what the racial categories are? It doesn't really work.
Yeah, yeah.
And there are more skin complexions on that one continent than there are in the entire rest of the world. So we already know that race doesn't really hold as a biological construct. There's no ontological reality. However, there's a social reality, and what it does, it enables power dynamics to be played out. It enables the kind of, I'm not going to call any particular politician out, but across the pond and here, it enables politicians to make statements that reinforces beliefs about people being the other, and therefore managing a power base based on that. So that's what I mean in terms of it being a technology, kind of drawing on Cedric Robinson's work. It's like, it's a way of achieving dominance. And, if you go back to transatlantic slave trade and think about what was unique about that, because we know that there have been many modes of slavery as far back as anyone's been documenting the world. The unique thing about the transatlantic slave trade is that it was race-based, that the criteria that enabled colonial powers in their minds to enslave people was literally based on a racialized identity, depending on like which island they went to. It was, if you look like this, because you met the criteria of being subhuman.
Yeah.
Again, going back to Frantz Fanon, he kind of spoke about that language. And because people were seen as subhuman, then it enabled that economic regime to become established. So that's what I mean. It's like there, not because it's a real thing in ontological terms. It's only real as far as it enables power to get played out.
Wow. Okay. So how do we use this technology to our benefit?
Well, in fact, I guess Black academics and radical Black thinking has for a long time been trying to remind the world of that lack of fixity that I kind of talk about, that Cedric Robinson talks about, and that we need to understand at the core of it is power, and that there are alliances that can be formed. So one of the things that we've seen is the bifurcation, the kind of separating off of race from class. And once we bring together race and class, then what we realize is that the power base becomes stronger. And we realize, so this sounds really like I'm trying to start a revolution. I'm not. But what actually is getting played out is that there are some people who hold on to power and wealth and will find all kinds of mechanisms to maintain their grasp on that power. And that will have an impact on lower income, working class people and people of racialized backgrounds. And there's the alliance. And the more we start to identify that the split isn't between me and you based on race, but actually it's between us who have little and those who have lots.
Yeah.
Once we understand that, then we shift the power dynamic. And it is what is hated. And that's why there is so much pushback against things like DEI or EDI, quality, diversity, and inclusion, and that kind of world, because there is a massive resistance to coalitions being formed, because it starts to, once you get a critical mass, you get more power.
More power. Yeah, 100%. Okay, so I feel like you might have answered this already, but what is the best thing Black people can do to better ourselves? What would you advise us to do? Where does our thinking need to go to next?
The answer is always going to be the same for me. It's about connecting up. The more we move away from we've been bought into the idea of individualism.
Yeah.
That, what I want to do is to replicate what I see other people doing. So if I can kind of get that 4x4 and I can kind of get that house with the electric gates and all of that, then I'm just going to keep pursuing that. And I'll talk to other people like me who want to do that. But all we're doing is we're reenacting the same ideas about individualism, and we forget how connected up we are. So the more we are in these conversations to help people who kind of say, oh, I'm not even worried about race, I just want to kind of get on my career, or, people who are pursuing a path because that's all they know, then we can begin to shift the dialogue. So that's the first thing, is to kind of move outside of our bubbles, whatever they are, and to start connecting up with people, and have conversations within our group, and then to do more coalition building to identify the source of power and what it is that we need to try and dismantle.
Yeah. Okay. Do you believe in racial trauma?
Well, yes, absolutely. So I've seen a lot of research on it. Peterson, Dr. Carter have done quite a lot of work on that, and it is a real thing. So just I guess to summarize for our listeners, the thing about trauma is that it's a response. So people think that the thing itself is trauma. The bad thing that happens to us isn't the trauma. It's the wound that is left. Now, one of the things we do know is that trauma gets passed on intergenerationally, and it gets passed on, another big word, so sorry, epigenetically, i.e. in our genes. Our genes change as a result of trauma, but it gets passed on socially also in terms of the way in which we interact. And there's been research done in, First Nation people in Australia, or Jewish people, where their offspring exhibit real trauma behaviors, even though they weren't there at the primary incidents where there were these kind of triggering traumatic cataclysmic things happening. So it kind of got passed on through families, and it continues to, and it changes our biology. So if people are interested in that, I'd say, read Inflamed by Maran Patel, really interesting book that looks at some of the way in which our physiology changes. So yeah, I do believe that some of the things that have happened are really grave. And I'll give you an example. I've grown up as someone who's black Caribbean, grew up in Jamaica, as we said. And I'm familiar with the stories about, the experience of African people in the transatlantic slave trade, and some of those things are really horrendous. However, about 6 months ago, I was doing some work with some therapists in New Zealand and Australia, and therefore went away and did some study, and was reading of some of the frontiers and some of the kind of colonial violence that was exerted upon those folk. And just reading some of what I was reading, I found really disturbing, almost kind of traumatic, like vicariously traumatic, having to read this stuff. And it really struck me that, oh yeah, of course, because I'm kind of familiar with the African story, I've grown up with it, but to kind of come new to First Nation Australian people, it's like some of the stuff, just even talking about it now, I kind of like, this, like the savagery, the savagery. Anyway, so I know that when people experience this stuff and it is in communities, it has an impact. It has an impact in how we think about ourselves, about what we can aspire to, but also it leaves that pain. And one of the things that the research, and going back to Dr. Carter and Peters, one of the things they identify is that a sense of injustice and powerlessness in the face of injustice is one of the key triggers in terms of causing trauma reactions. And living as people, as black people in a society, that sense of injustice is continually there, and that powerlessness, because we just kind of know the regime is so difficult to break through that we can't change it, or we feel sometimes we can't change it. So yeah, it's definitely a real thing, and I see it showing up, particularly in mental health for the people I work with.
Is there a way of healing that racial trauma? What would you say to people trying proper dealing with it, and the way to suppress that feeling, or is it something that's going to be with us for life?
So kind of going back to what I said about the collective thing, let me give you some like real concrete examples. You see, we in our communities often repeat ideas that are well-meaning. Things like, you got to work twice as hard if you want to get on. And we say it as though it's something to be normalized. And I get why it's a protective thing, but it's highly problematic because I've got colleagues who are out there working weekends and, neglecting their family life and their own well-being because they believe, like, if they want to keep their jobs, they have to
They
prove
have to,
something,
yeah,
and they
yeah.
burn out. Or we say things like, if this thing happened in the store and I didn't challenge, and I might say to you, Deji, man, if that were me, I'd have told them this. And I get where it comes from, but actually what we're doing is we're evoking shame in the other person. We're almost kind of saying, look, you just weren't strong
Yeah,
enough
you
to
want, yeah,
deal with
yeah.
this. And all I'm saying is the more we spot those patterns that have become so normalized, we think that we're trying to be supportive of each other. But if we can just have a bit more compassion and say, we're all trying to struggle through this. And, sometimes we're going to make a call that maybe isn't the right one,
Yeah, yeah.
but you're just trying to get through your day. I hear you. And to be more collective and saying, like, what might have helped? How might you have handled that? Say, I'll tell you, that kind of happened to me last week. And actually, I walked out, but then I kind of came back in 5 minutes ago. And then I said, could I speak to the manager? And I dealt with it that way. It's, oh, yeah, actually, good shout, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And just be a lot more kind of hearing each other and extending compassion. So I think that is one of the ways in which we can begin to heal trauma and to not just kind of replicate those judgments.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, on actually what you said, like thinking about raising children, should we as black people start to install a psychology where we are saying things like, actually, you do need to work twice as hard because actually your white counterparts are gonna get opportunities if you don't, opportunities over you if you don't. We can see why people would say that. Do you feel like that is helpful or harmful? And if that's harmful, if that's something that we should avoid doing, then actually what is the right message we should be giving to our children to make sure that actually they're excelling in society that we know kind of oppresses us?
Okay, so I think it's the reality. And often I have a phrase which is, as long as I know I'm doing this thing, whilst I try and get to the next point, that it's not like this is the way it will always be and I'm going to acquiesce in that. It's like, okay, whilst the world looks the way it does, here are some things we need to know. But I don't think that it should have to be like this, and to make that really explicit. So that's the kind of thing that I think is really important, to not normalize the idea that you've got these structures.
The world is like this, yeah, that actually, yeah,
Because
it
otherwise,
can change. Yeah.
absolutely, otherwise we make it just kind of seem as though we're just throwing our hands in the air and going, oh, it's just
It is
like,
what it is, yeah, yeah.
So there's that. The second thing I think is really important, and I alluded to this earlier, is to not conflate race as an identity with the experience of racism. So in that conversation with our kids, to not kind of go, oh, because you're black, you're going to have to work twice as hard, or because it makes it sound as though there's something about who you are. Whereas I like the idea of saying, because of the racism that is so woven into our society and that it's everywhere, that you're going to encounter these things because other people have got this racism. And it's so pervasive, and many people are reenacting ideas, not because they're bad and evil, but they just haven't been exposed. I know we kind of think they should have been, but they've not been exposed to ways of thinking that challenges that. So they're just reenacting norms. And I think it's really helpful to name that that's what's happening, is that other people are doing this thing. It isn't something about who you are.
Yeah, yeah. Very powerful again. Okay, I want you to speak to me now. I want you to speak to my experience. I feel like through my adulthood, I feel like I became super conscious about like the black struggle and various struggles we have. So a lot of my work I was speaking to a colleague about this. Anytime I go into a piece of work, I feel like I'm in a privileged position, and that I've always been in the field where I'm helping people, basically support worker, mental health practitioner, forensic mental health practitioner, clinical psychology. So always like helping people, like kind of frontline. And I always have my main thing that I need to do in my day to day. And then I always kind of get involved in some initiative that's to help my people, to better my people. So like when I was a forensic mental health practitioner, I was on a specialist gangs unit where I was working with young black men, mostly from Southwark. And even now, it's like being at Cambridge. Like Cambridge is a weird space because like you're at your college, but there's so many other things that you can do to better the experience of black people coming through Cambridge, because that's the thing as well. So I'm part of like the Black Advisory Hub. I'm getting to a point now where I'm very conscious about the way my life is, and just bettering my life and my mental well-being, and how stressful all of that extra piece of work is for me and not helping me. And then number two, about thinking that actually I can't change, the systems aren't going to change in my time. I might be able to do a small piece of work that might shift something, but actually I'm not going to get to see the results of that. I have never been able to see the results of what I believe to be my good work, because actually, although I may have made changes, I'm only maybe changing one person's perspective of things rather than like the system changing in a significant way. And I feel like it's just given me, it's made me kind of burn out, or I've got like compassion fatigue, or a certain compassion fatigue specific to this module, where actually I'm less inclined to do this work. I'm less inclined to go to a meeting across town that's about the experience of black individuals in Cambridge, because I've got work to do here and I'm kind of burnt out. How would you advise me to get over that? If you would even advise me to do that, acknowledging that I'm saying that actually it's now taking its toll on my mental health and well-being.
Yeah, tough situation, and one that like many of us are familiar with.
Yeah.
If you fly, next time you fly, notice the bit where they say, if you've got a child, make sure you put on your mask first.
Yeah. So you can help the child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I always remember like fire briefings I've had, and they say, whatever's happening in the house, the first thing you do, no matter if your kids are in the next room, is phone the fire brigade and then go. And it's like, it's so counterintuitive, because you can, other people are unsafe, let me save them. Then you go across the landing and no one's got the call. So I think they're metaphors for that thing about like, those things we need to pay attention to.
Yeah.
So literally we don't burn out. And there might be occasions where we say, in this season, either my career or my well-being is going to be priority, and that's okay. And to not see it as an absolute position.
Yeah.
Because as human beings, we're not fixed.
Yeah.
And I think, for me, one of the benefits of kind of getting older, it's like, I always use the analogy, a kid at 14 on summer camp, when the person they've been in a relationship for 2 weeks splits up with them and the world falls apart and they're an absolute mess because they have no perspective.
Yeah.
And then you kind of get to 30 or something and you kind of, all right,
that was a nothing situation. Yeah.
And you get used to it. And like now, sometimes I'm going through stuff and I ride it out and just go, I'm not pretending right now this thing isn't horrendous. It feels really horrendous. But I also know that this stuff, it does pass.
Yeah.
And I think that thing about seasons, just go, okay, what do I need right now? And again, for it not just to be an individual head thing, but to, connect up with people who do different things. You suddenly think, actually, I've climbed a differ, Snowdon, and you kind of think, wow, I can't believe I've not done that. And then it just shifts something. And then you think, okay, now I've found what I go to. Or some people later in life get into, open water swimming and the cold water thing, or whatever it is, to start to discover these ways of healing. And sometimes that's through having different social networks. So that's largely what I'd say is, self-compassion, recognizing that there are seasons and there might be occasions when we become a bit more insular, a bit more focused on us. And it might be recharging, and we say, okay, maybe later on in my career, something will happen. And what's great about that is often the more we take care of ourselves, we end up finding ourselves in those positions in future where it comes with ease.
Yeah.
Where people just reach out and you go, actually, you've asked a question that I can really speak to. And it's light work to give this thing.
Yeah. No, that's some good advice. Okay. All right, let's give some advice to the practitioners out there now. How would you advise, let's say, a black practitioner trying to navigate some of the themes we've discussed today to actually improve the experience of the people that they're there to care for, and to then also maybe educate some of their colleagues?
So one of the big challenges often is people in those practitioners in those environments feeling that they don't want to take on the responsibility for educating, and rightly so. We've had generation after generation having our labor taken for free,
Yeah.
and to become the educators of our colleagues, just because we want to do something good. Like you say, it kind of burns us out.
Yeah.
So I'd say be cautious about that. However, I think what's really helpful is to speak to people who are like us. That's kind of going, I keep talking about this collective thing.
Yeah.
But you know how many times, whether it's in therapy or in colleagueship, where you say this thing and then other people in the room go, oh yeah. And I'll give you an example. A group of black nurses were at a launch of a report I was looking at. This was in the NHS, it wasn't just mental health, about racism in nursing. And then somebody in the room was kind of talking about their experience, and they said, yeah, it's a bit like when you go for a job and they just say to you, oh, you're nearly there, you're a close second, but there was just someone who just
got it before. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the laughter across the room, it was so palpable, because it was like
Everybody's experienced that. Yeah.
everyone's got that, and like, all right, okay, and just that knowing of, so yeah,
Other somebody else's. It's not just me, sort of thing.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's
It's a
like,
warming
okay.
feeling. Yeah.
And I think that going back to toxic interaction theory and the idea of being validated, that it's kind of really important for us to be in spaces where we feel validated,
Yeah.
where we kind of think, oh, maybe I'm being too sensitive, or maybe I should just suck it up because it kind of comes with the territory. So a classic example is the experience of racism from people who are supposedly psychotic. And, some places have a zero tolerance approach, but often black workers will have to deal with that.
Yeah.
And, their colleagues will go, oh, yeah, that's really, really awful. Anyway, do you know where the keys for the locker room are? And it's that thing of going to spaces where people go, do you know that this is really bad? We shouldn't have to deal with this.
Yeah.
So, okay, we're going to go and do it tomorrow, but not because we think we have to, or it's like, okay, we've got the bills to pay, but it isn't okay. And the more we have the collective voices, as I say, it validates our lived reality, that it's still stinging. Like, you could be in that role for 15 years and most of it doesn't get you, but someone on a particular day said, and it's still stinging.
Yeah.
And to feel it's okay. It's okay to say, actually, I feel rocked, I'm going to call in sick.
Yeah.
And, to know that you've got colleagues who are going, yeah, I had
support
something like that.
you.
Yeah, I
I
had something like
understand.
that too.
Yeah.
So I think that's really, really important. So often, people who are trying to pursue their careers don't want to be seen as black. They kind of want to be a good psychologist or a good, CPN, a community psychiatric nurse, and that's what they're focused on. So
Yeah.
there's a black workers network. A, they haven't got the time, or B, they kind of don't really want to raise their head above the parapet. I suggest, even if it's outside of work with online meetings and stuff, just join something on Eventbrite, hang out in the space for a bit. It is so validating. That matters more than anything else, I think.
Yeah, amazing. Another great answer. Okay, you touched on something that I feel like is happening in society, especially amongst people my age. So I'm talking about people that maybe have been working for about 5 years, 6 years, 8 years, maybe 10 years. And it's about healthcare at the moment and the experience of healthcare for black people in particular. A lot of black women are speaking to this at the moment. And I feel like people are becoming, they're speaking about it a lot, which is good, but actually we are now getting a more defeatist mentality, or maybe a mentality where it's like, actually you should avoid certain health services, or the health service, I should say, the National Health Service, because our experience of it is bad, and that's making people less likely to access healthcare. First of all, what do you think about that whole conversation going on? And then how do we navigate that? How do we navigate knowing that actually our experience is worse off, but still get the care we need when we need it?
So this again is where class intersects with race, because it is a reality that in the kind of age bracket you're talking about, or people considering whether or not to use services, the more middle class you are and the more you're able to navigate the system, the easier it is to kind of go and say, actually, I've gone on and I've looked at the NICE guidelines. I know what I'm entitled to, or actually, I know this is your opinion, but is there another GP in the surgery who I could, and they say, no, sorry, we're all busy. I say, what's your protocol? And we know the questions to ask and hold our ground. And that's a class thing. So I think the conversation is really good that we're having it. And it's interesting because maybe 25 years ago, particularly in mental health, I remember the Department of Health was really keen, maybe it wasn't 25 years ago, it was around that time frame, really keen to stop talking about racial disparities, because they said the more we talk about it, the more people feel
Feel like, yeah,
disenfranchised,
exactly,
and
yeah,
it becomes a problem. And I don't think the answer is to pretend it doesn't exist. So just to kind of scotch that as a solution to kind of say, all right, let's just kind of carry on as though nothing's happening. It is happening. And I think what we need to do is to find not more research as to what the problems are in our communities, but what is it about the structure of the system that we end up with these kind of outcomes.
Yeah.
And when you look across the board, there are some particular patterns that repeat themselves. One is, it's very simple, that the darker skinned we are, the more animalistic people believe us to be. I know this sounds really coarse, but it is an absolute reality. And if you look at the kind of outcomes, whether it's in the interventions in psychiatry or the interventions in maternity, you see, if you hold that as a narrative, that narrative exists in the unconscious, then you see it getting played out. So you kind of look at police restraints, or you look at restraints, and it's like you see the same thing getting played out, or look at the adultification of young boys and young girls of color. It comes from this belief that there's a degree of animalistic behavior and something in us. Now, I think the more articulate we are about what we're seeing played out, the more it holds the system to account to say, this is what we think is the problem. Not that's that we need to do unconscious bias training of workers. That's too simplistic. Get right to the core.
Yeah. Okay. I actually love what you said about, again, I never thought about it like that, where actually the more access, I guess you're speaking about access to education you had, the more you know what you can and can't say to doctors. Just by working in this space now, I know so much more about how I would navigate this service if I encountered it, because I know what can be done, what can't be done, and when a practitioner is just telling me something. And actually, even that, it's like a lot of people don't see that as a privilege, but that is actually a privilege, just having that knowledge.
And before you go on to another question, what's kind of interesting about this is that where you've got people of color who might be trying to advocate for things in their interest, and others will go, oh yeah, you're always kind of asking special pleading. Check out the middle classes who want support for their kids because they're neurodivergent or whatever it is. They've got a health condition. You really see people who ramp
they'll
up.
probe, they'll press,
as they're advocating, and they'll take time off work and they'll go and say, I went to the surgery, I didn't leave, and they're proud at the dinner parties to say, this is what I did. And depending on who's doing this thing, it looks and sounds different. And I just kind of think we should hold that in mind. That, and to be able to kind of go, this is the same thing that white middle class people are doing constantly and getting resources.
I guess from a white middle class person, it probably looks more like, okay, you're determined and you're motivated. And from a black person, it's like, actually, you're nagging and you're being a problem and you're being annoying, sort of.
Absolutely.
Okay. I've got one last question to ask you, but before I ask you that curveball question, we've been speaking for about an hour. I've learned so much. I feel like one of the things I'm going to put in the caption is just watch me get educated, because I'm just learning so much. But yeah, I guess, is there anything you want to promote, anything you're doing, social media at the moment, anything you want the audience to be able to find you? And if somebody's interested in you and wants to know more about your work and what you're doing, where can they find you?
Yeah, sure. Well, the website for the consultancy is www.hsconsultancy.org.uk. There's also a HS Consultancy Limited YouTube page, and there's a playlist called Concepts in a Teacup that I'd really encourage people to go and check out there. Maybe 4 to 6 minutes of me in a very pedestrian way, just talking through some of the kind of big concepts that are kind of skirted around today, just to kind of help people see and have a language for everyday encounters. Like, one might be the other false equivalences, where someone goes, oh yeah, I know what it's like. I used to wear glasses at school. They used to call me names. I know what it's like.
Yeah, that's a false equivalent. That isn't the same as my experience, basically.
No, absolutely. So there's a whole list of those on Concepts in the Teacup on YouTube. So they're the kind of places. What I didn't say when I introduced myself is that I write. So, there are quite a few articles in, peer-reviewed journals and things that people can look up. Got a couple of books under my own name and several chapters, essays in other people's books. So I think they're documented on my LinkedIn. If anyone wants to see what I've written, find me on LinkedIn. I'd really recommend you do that. And await the book on toxic interaction theory that I'm not going to make promises about the date, but it's not too far in the
Not too far
future.
away.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, I look forward to it. It's good to hear new theories. Okay, my last question is: if you had a megaphone, if I gave you a megaphone and you could speak to all of society, so this isn't even just black people, this is all of society, and you had to give them one psychological insight that's helped you, that you think could help individuals in society and or society as a whole, what would that be?
I think it would be understanding the idea of the double bind. And in psychological terms, and it kind of links to chaotic attachments, it's when you get these mixed messages of I want you, I don't want you, I love you, I don't love you. And one of the most toxic things, I think, which loops us right back round, that people of color, but people from many marginalized groups or other people in society might experience, is being in a situation where you're constantly feeling the push-pull, and to notice when you're feeling it and what it's doing to you, and to find ways to get healing around that, because that is really, really toxic. It's one of the things that makes us make bad decisions, and it makes us shut ourselves down, and we find ways to shut ourselves down using alcohol, drugs, the kind of relationships we form. We often are trying to salve our own pain,
Yeah.
because the push-pull is so painful.
Yeah.
So I'd say attend to that.
What kind of environments or dynamics might we experience that push pull? Like, what are we talking about? Are we talking about romantic relationships? Are we talking about work relationships? Or are you talking about all of them?
I'm talking about all of them. So
Okay.
let's go back to the workplace. That thing of you're in the team and you're a valued member of the team,
Yeah.
but you just don't feel
you're
it.
still, yeah. You're still black and you're still othered in some way. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I often put this question to teams, which is, when you go home, what are the things that have happened in the workplace that you didn't talk about in the workplace, but you were able to talk to with family members or
At
people
home.
who look like you? And there's always going to be a difference. And it's not just around race, it's going to be other aspects of identity, that everyone in the team thinks we all get on really, really well together.
Yeah.
But when you bear a particular characteristic, you hear so much stuff that other people don't hear.
Yeah.
And therefore you get this push-pull, because it's like, yeah, you're part of the team, everyone's smiling, but you know that there's the classic, I'm going to leave it here. There's a classic, and it is a long time ago, but a consultant psychiatrist in the team I was in once was just kind of talking about something, and we are trying to figure this problem out, and he just said, it's like looking for an N-word in the woodpile, right, in the team. And I was thinking, yeah, I don't know, in the power dynamics and stuff, I didn't say anything at the time, but I was also very shocked that no one said
challenged
anything.
it, yeah.
Then I went to him afterwards and said, this didn't sit well with me. And he said, no, what you need to understand is that it's just a turn of phrase. It's not like directed at you. And that was his answer. And if people want an example of what it feels like to have that push-pull, that like you belong but you don't, that is the kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it might not be said sadly, I hear stories of that happening nowadays, but it might not be as raw as that, but people are hearing things like that.
Yeah.
And Muslim people are hearing a lot of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which they're violent communications, really violent. And it's hard because you work with people, as I said, the reality is we like our colleagues often.
Yeah.
It's not like we just despise them. We like them, and it makes it doubly more painful then.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I believe so many people are going to be educated from this conversation. I definitely got educated on so many themes. And yeah, I just want to thank you for coming down to Cambridge and having this conversation with me. Yeah.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for the invite. Anytime.